Happy Friday, Phillip.
Hey, happy Friday, Lenan.
That was very enthusiastic for no reason. I'm pretty tired, honestly.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Indeed.
But it's exciting. We're our first podcast episode of Conversations in the Office.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. You and I have great conversations, so it's a wonderful way for us to actually share them with others.
We do have a conversation topic for today. We've decided on repetition.
Yeah, yeah, repetition, repetition, repetition.
Now, I have a bunch of notes here based on both readings and things I contemplate on a daily basis.
Okay, good.
So let's see where we could start. I think the easiest would be the most obvious, which is music.
Yeah. Well, you and I both love to listen to music, and we both love similar types of music as well. And one of the things that's actually is very interesting about repetition is in music, is that repetition isn't just a repetition of a particular thing in music. It actually gives structure to the music. What I mean by that is a lot of music actually communicates through its repetition. And the basic types of ways we have of thinking about structures and songs, experimental music, and even classical music involve repetition in some form.
I don't usually think about music in that context. I guess I think about it more in the context of pop music, of what's popular, in terms of community building. Unfortunately, I have a lot to say about this, but it's more of a dense topic, which I'll just get into, I guess.
Absolutely.
So I'm really into hip hop.
Yeah.
I don't listen to it religiously or anything, but I feel like there's a lot of nuances to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that I think about a lot is sampling in particular. And I feel like it not only highlights maybe obscure music that culturally we haven't appreciated over time, but also kind of validates, I think it's the right word, a certain community that has engaged with that form at some point. For me in particular, I feel like a lot of hip hop artists, they love music from video games in the 90s.
Right, right.
And I've noticed that there is like a lot of sampling going on there. But it's actually more complex than that. Not only is, let's say, sampling in particular from like Sega Genesis games, very popular in kind of the indie underground hip hop scene. But for me, what I listen to is, a lot of these, they're defined as new school rappers. The beats they use are all square form waves.
Interesting. Now, what do you mean by a square form wave?
Like an audio waveform. Like waveforms that are square rather than like sine or...
Right, instead of the usual kind of sine wave.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is it's most common because it's kind of soft on the ears, while squares very piercing.
Right, because they have their attack is immediate and there's no decay.
Yes.
Right?
And I've noticed that's become particularly popular as of late.
Interesting. Okay. Yep.
Yeah. And the way it's been, recontextualized is, transformed. Let's say in a video game, it's supposed to convey a sense of wonder. I would say that in this new type of music, it's more of a sense of like haziness, reverie.
Right.
You're out at a party and you're having a good time because you don't know what's going on. Which I feel like those are two clear correlations to me that are like, yeah. For me, those are similar feelings. Like the sense of wonder you get as a child playing those video games. Probably the same being in that environment as an adult. A different environment, but same feeling is how I'm getting at.
Right.
Yeah.
I see. Okay, so that's a really interesting concept about repetition.
Yeah.
And something that has a real strong resonance in intellectual history, actually.
Mm-hmm.
The difference between repetition of the same and repetition as a form of engagement to create something new. Right? So this was argued actually most famously by Kierkegaard. And
Makes sense.
Yeah, when Kierkegaard was thinking about in his little essay, an essay where he was portrayed a guy who was just broken up with his lover, and the fellow was thinking about was going back to the places that he and his lover used to inhabit. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they kind of came to this realization that there's two ways of returning. And I think this tells us a lot about difference. And that one of the ways is to return to kind of recapture that old feeling. And the other one is, I think, much more subtle and much more nuanced and gets exactly to what you were talking about with music. And that is, there's a way that we use repetition to return somewhere to create something new as we do it, right? And this is what I was talking about earlier on when I was saying that repetition in music not only just repeats the same, it actually helps differentiate and structure something entirely new.
The first thing that came up to me when you were talking about going back to a time that is kind of desired, let's say.
Yeah.
Freudian concept, right? Repetition compulsion.
Repetition and compulsion, yeah.
Yeah.
And developed actually elegantly in my favorite Freudian piece, and that's Beyond the Pleasure Principle.
Ooh. That's
Right.
a
Contrasting.
great title.
Yeah. Yeah. When Freud tries to think about why do we repeat things, even if they don't bring us pleasure.
Yeah.
Right. And this is where the compulsion to repeat comes from. And Freud ends up doing some really cool stuff that can spin us off into a beautiful universe of discussion about biology and beings. But for Freud, it was a way that we incorporated kind of an inorganic aspect of the world into ourselves in this notion of repetition, right? That kind of moved us beyond very much what Freud thought of as the pleasure principle that derives from our organic being, where that's more teleological and we search for pleasure. This is, for Freud, this was like below that level and was all about a part of us that is mineral and just wants to repeat and repeat and repeat.
I'm thinking repetition as a tool for social engineering.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will touch upon this a little bit more. But I think I want to stay on the topic of music a little bit further for at least the next few minutes, because you might have more to say that might enthrall me. But I know exactly where I'm going with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Roll. You want me to roll on social engineering, or you want me to roll on music?
Let's go on social engineering.
Okay. Okay, this is really fascinating. There's been a recovery, really in the last 20 years, of a French sociologist by the name of Gabriel Tarde.
Okay.
And Tarde's work is in contrast to a lot of other people's thinking about human activities. One of the things that Tarde recognizes is the importance of imitation. Not original creation necessarily in human life, but imitation. And so Tarde has developed through some thinkers like Tony Sampson, his book Virality, ends up becoming a touchstone, right? For thinking about how repetition occurs through modern media and the different ways we have of communicating. And a good example of that is thinking about the virality or the repetition of the dissemination through repetition of a meme, right?
Yeah.
What does that do? What's the consequences of that? A lot of our communications happen through memes, emojis, elements we have that are repeating that are not necessarily textual, right? And then also, how can we actually build a way of thinking about communication that can incorporate this in a way that can create to more creative and less oppressive forms of relationships? Or is it something that we just need to be mindful of and be careful that we don't do? And that kind of, for me, that's kind of where we started was so important. I think if we start with music and how repetition can structure things, it takes us into a totally different way of thinking about social organization than if we think about how repetition works.
So I'm on TikTok a lot. I'm not sure if you have a TikTok.
No, but my daughter gives me highlights of her feed.
Yeah, it's my favorite platform, a social media platform, and that's mostly because it's people are so creative,
Yeah,
and people build community in the weirdest ways.
yeah.
Like for example, on my main feed called the For You page on the app, um, there was a video the other day that had like I want to say like 3 million views, 400K likes, and it was just a video of someone eating. Yeah, it's like low angle, someone eating very like slow and sensually,
Oh, that's cool.
and like the comment sections is people just laughing at it.
So that's really interesting. Can you tell me? Can you explain to me a little bit more about the creative potential there?
Like it's less about the content and more what people do with the content.
I get it.
Yeah, like we're forcing this into importance is how I'm thinking about it.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's a type of highlighting that takes place, right? So
Yeah.
it raises it into importance. This comes back to your insights about community building.
Hmm.
The fact that people then engage in that, that's what builds the community, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay, that's really cool.
But what I wanted to touch upon in regards to social engineering, this is gonna be a whole thing. Sorry, I'm kind of excited.
Okay, go. Let's roll, man.
Yeah. So first, I'm gonna preface this by saying that one thing that I like about talking with people, just eventually something's gonna click. And I had that moment, a very significant moment like that with one of our CHID students, or I guess graduates.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah, this was when I was doing the student recordings for Instagram. I was talking to Julian. Was it Julian? No, it was Brenton.
It was Brenton. Okay,
It
yeah.
might have been both of them. I think I asked the same question because that's where the conversation was.
There's repetition for you.
There's repetition right there. But I guess the question I asked was, how would you define your love language? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And either one of them or both of them said a gift giving.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And I I felt an immediate connection because that's something I think about a lot in terms of my relationships with people.
Yeah.
It's not only a part of my identity, but it's also kind of a part of my own personal happiness and gaining that.
Oh, cool. Good.
And that's how
So now I know how to get you gifts.
Thanks, Philip. But that's what I mean about social engineering. It's kind of a meme with my friends, if anything.
I see. Yeah, I get it. And so the idea here with the gift giving is you are actually, this is an act that you're repeating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And gets repeated throughout your interactions. And because of that repetition, right? And it's really then the type of repetition that we talked about before, the type of repetition where you go back to do something new, right? That's what happens when you give a gift.
Yeah.
At least a successful gift.
Yeah.
And so that's actually, so you think that that's where we build community?
Definitely. That's very interpersonal. And it gets harder, once you leave certain institutions.
Yeah.
Like, for example, a lot easier for me to achieve that in college. Because you're always seeing the same person over and over again, whether that's in class or an organization or whatever. And that's where I really honed my skills, is how I'm going to say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I kind of found out, like, okay, what things really connect with people?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Got it.
surprise, surprise, food is the most popular option.
Okay. Yeah. No, I love gifts of food, actually. And that's a type of gift, actually, I feel happy and comfortable giving.
Mm-hmm.
And not growing up in a family that gave a lot of gifts,
Yeah.
I have issues with gifts. Not issues with food, but actually my family just didn't have a lot of intimacy to begin with. So I guess my larger issue is with intimacy.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons why I love your idea about the gift of food, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that it's a way of thinking about how intimacy becomes kind of material and embodied in a way that helps sustain people.
Mm-hmm.
And that is absolutely a type of that's a type of gifting that I'd be happy to get behind.
Yeah, I guess speaking on intimacy, that's kind of the fine line when you're trying to convince someone through repetitive tasks, or yeah, task is a fine word, that you're worth being in their life.
Yeah.
Because it has to be kind of personal, but not too personal. Because
yeah.
that might be too weird.
But this is part of the thing about repetition is, and again, I think it goes back to the fact of the references to TikTok, social media, and that is repetition in this form and intimacy plays out differently when it's sounds, images, or texts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Texts have often been upheld as with a certain epistemological standard, or a standard of how we get to know and understand the world. And for a lot of texts, repetition is tough unless you're in a song or you're a poet, right? But not so with music, not so with TikTok,
Mm-hmm.
right? And not so with memes. I'm wondering if there's a different type of intimacy that's communicated through sounds and images versus texts.
Mm-hmm.
Please do this, because this could really help my love life. Tell me.
Yeah, that's a loaded question, though. I'll answer with how I can answer.
Okay.
Which is more just relating all of that into the practical, is how I'm going to say it. Because as you were talking, I was thinking about how a gift giving could be kind of like a musical composition. It's like, okay, I'll start off with something small. What's small? I don't know. What do people my age do? A playlist. That's what young people do.
Right.
But the thing about a playlist is that it's so non-threatening, that it's a good first step.
But it's pretty ambiguous too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, in my day, it was a mixtape.
Yeah.
And that's a loaded gift. Somebody gives you a mixtape,
Yeah.
it's an open-ended intimacy there. Where does it go? What are they saying to me?
Well, yeah, there's a difference. I would argue there's a difference between a playlist and a mixtape.
I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah, a mixtape is pretty, it's a physical gift.
And it goes into, there's a lot more construction than like creating a playlist on Spotify.
Yeah, I would say it's less personal. It's still somewhat intimate, like especially if you're not very subtle with your playlist.
So this is cool.
Uh-huh.
Okay, and I think your observation actually helped me understand that fine line between intimacy and repetition. And that is, when you make a playlist and then and gift it to somebody, that ends up becoming, you're not telling them something, right? It's not a message about you do this or you don't do that. The common idea we have of thinking about how communication happens, the common and I think would argue misguided way of thinking about how communication happens. Instead, what you're doing is it's like an invitation. It's a welcoming. It's like saying, here is an aural space that I've been inhabiting. Come join this with me.
Dang. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I'm saying, but I've never thought about it in those words. That's going to make me rethink a lot of, I guess, playlists that I've given with that context. And it'll be probably a little bit uncomfortable for myself and be like, oh gosh, what space was I inferring?
Oh yeah, man. I don't even want to go back the ones I've shared. So,
but it might be important for me personally, just so I could. If I don't usually make playlists anymore because I feel like I'm a bit better at giving a gift that I would perceive as something that's, I don't know, higher value, but still pretty low risk is how I'm gonna say it.
Yeah. No, that's right.
I feel like a book is a good start.
Well, it's the same type of thing, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, this is a inner world landscape that I've experienced through engaging with this text. I'd like you to share. I'd like to share it with you.
But a book I've never read. Yeah. It's I feel like giving a book that I've read, that's very personal.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like it might be it might promote anxiety in people. Like, oh gosh, this book means a lot to you.
Yeah.
Well, I don't feel like reading it.
Yeah, I know. It ends up becoming a burden, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, how can I live up to the expectation of reading this book?
But just buying the book based on someone's interest, even if you've never read the book, even if you will never read the book, you have no interest in it. The gift itself and the presentation of it all, I feel like it's worth a $10 to give to buy and give to someone.
This is a pretty cheap book.
Well, I'm starting small here, and I would also argue that it's less about monetary value and more about how much effort you've put into something.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I was just being snide. Go ahead.
No, I got that. Yeah. I guess this is the topic we're going into, and we're having a great time with it.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic.
I have a question for you.
Okay, yeah.
Have you ever given a gift that you would perceive as both high risk and high reward?
Okay, I'm like spelunking into the corners of my memories right now. And I have given gifts in some sense, and this goes back to the intimacy thing for me. All gifts are high risk.
Ooh, that's a very good and cautious way to approach it. I would say that the highest risk item is a letter.
Oh.
There's a lot you can mess up in a letter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, no, letters are... oh, my God.
Yeah, no. Speaking of shame.
Yeah,
it's good that I don't make copies of mine and then that they're just out in the world.
Yeah.
For me to hopefully never find again.
So by letter, you're talking about a handwritten letter.
Handwritten. Oh, yes. That's another thing that I did a lot a few years back. Writing people's letters, sending it to them. And this was about a time where I was still trying to figure out how to, I guess, want and let people into my life.
Yeah.
Because that's always been kind of like, growing up, I feel like establishing relationships was a very difficult proposition for myself.
Yeah.
And then this one time, and then I got into a letter writing in college because people sent me letters, and I was like, I like this. But then I got into it too much, where it became kind of a regular thing, and I was sending a lot of people letters.
Oh, and what were some of the responses?
It ranged from, thanks for the very personal letter. It was a very interesting read. I know a lot about you now, and don't worry, it's I don't view you differently. To I'm gonna be very polite in the next few paragraphs, but please know that was a lot.
Yeah, got it. Okay, yeah. So, but there must be. So you said high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
Has there been a high reward for that?
Has there been a high reward
for writing letters?
For writing letters, I feel like in terms of my friendships, there has. I feel like people probably view me.
I see.
In a very, I guess, more a vulnerable light now, which is always, I won't say it's always a plus, but for the people I've let into my life, it is a plus.
Yeah.
Admittedly, this is hilarious. I think I've only written letters to friends.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't really use it as like a tool for I guess for like more intimate relationships.
I see. Yeah.
Um yeah, this is something I do think about a lot. Like with people I guess more seriously been with is how I'm going to say it.
Yep.
Um I admittedly put kind of like less effort into those. And I don't know what that says about repetition and how I go about that. Like, maybe I'm selfish, and maybe like in my mind, just my presence in the relationship is enough. Is how I probably justify it subconsciously.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, right? Because
Yeah.
there's that word again, or that notion, that topic again that we talked about with communication,
Yeah.
where it's not just messages. Sometimes it's about sharing something, whether
Yeah.
that be a presence, whether that be a thought, whether that be a set of beats that helps you feel a certain way.
Totally.
Yeah. So that's really cool. So using repetition then and community building in a way that ends up forming a type of sharing, right?
Hmm.
That isn't necessarily overly intimate, but can invite people in a way that they may not have felt invited in before.
Yes. And thank God I looked at my notes because I have another point for this. My way of doing it also is via language, but not English, because I know some Spanish.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like a subtle thing I throw in if I've been hanging out with someone for a while. It's like I feel comfortable talking to you in Spanish. Doesn't I don't care if you don't understand,
I see.
but it's
Yeah.
just such a part of my identity.
Okay.
I kind of want to introduce it into like I guess the social
Absolutely.
field.
But that's so cool, right? Because
Hmm.
it is again about inhabiting a certain identity in a certain space rather than communicating a message, right? And this, I think, is 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 the important aspect of how we've been thinking and talking about this type of repetition.
Mm.
From the terms of like text and narrative theory and communication theory, or frankly, for any modernist, repetition is something you avoid, right? Like I think it might even be in Strunk and White, that little thing that we have for that little guide that I had to read when I was a boy for writing,
Yeah.
and other people might reference it about problems with repetition in writing.
Hmm.
What we're talking is kind of throwing that over on its head, right?
Yeah.
It's really about repetition in some sense. Repetition achieves something in writing that a story or an argument or a message.
Fashion.
Oh my gosh.
I thought about this walking around Seattle, because what's popular here, I've noticed, and in terms of fashion, not a lot is popular here.
Yeah. I love that.
Uh, but people kind of have this early 2000s or just general 2000s goth phase here,
Oh yeah.
which is kind of funny to me. But I'm kind of happy for the people who do inhabit that space.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm glad they're
Can you explain this phase? Give me some examples of what this is like.
just aesthetically just all black, and that means everything.
Oh
Black
yeah.
hair,
Yeah,
black
yeah. No, that's right.
blouse, black shirt. Like I can't really define it anything clear because there's a lot of variations of goth.
Yeah, absolutely. But I know that type of variation.
And me coming from Southern California, it's very weird just seeing just kind of traditional goth as a way that the younger generation chooses to embellish in.
Yeah.
Because what I'm familiar with is beach goth.
Okay, tell me about beach goth. This sounds like something I might like.
It uses lighter clothing as a way to contrast the dark gothy mood. So it's known more as like a musical phase, if anything.
Oh.
Kind of. I'm gonna be kind of a music nerd about this right now. But like the Orange County indie rock scene from like 2010 to like 2015.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Burger Records, that
Yeah,
kind of
got it.
vibe. Aesthetically, though, in terms of clothing, it's like black is still the prominent color, but maybe someone wears like a top that's like, what's it called, like a jean jacket.
Yeah, jean jacket. Yeah.
Yeah, like a light jean jacket, or the person wearing it has blonde hair, or just things like that. Like, I acknowledge this as gothic, but there's something about this that feels more welcoming for the outsider.
I get it.
Yeah, and not as exclusive.
Got it. So we're back to repetition.
Yes, we are.
Because it's in that act of not just repetition of the same that can cut people off, right? That has a fine. It's not fine actually. It's a robust line between who can fit in this repeated element and who doesn't. But the type of repetition you're talking about is much more like a soft repetition that allows for a creativity. It has the sinews, right, of the goth, but it allows for the creativity and the expression on it that kind of suggests, hey, this is, the goth might be part of what I am, but there's other stuff too. And we can share the goth, but let's express the other stuff as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, and there's a lot to consider with that in terms of, I guess, connotations.
Huh.
I guess regarding like an aesthetic being repetitious for community's sake.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like ideally, I feel like soft repetition is the way to do it.
Yeah.
Because if you go entirely hard in it, then you kind of draw a line as to who could join your group.
Then it becomes yeah. In my writing, when I've been writing about goth recently, one of the things I've noticed, and this is with a lot of social movements, right? And or actually a lot of education, when it becomes an element unto itself, right?
Yeah.
That repetition is the same.
Yeah.
Right? When the teleological process wants to repeat just what just happened, that's when you lose your creativity.
Ooh.
That's when you aren't able to reach out, and also, and this goes back to your point about Seattle fashion. That's when it becomes a cliche.
It is kind of a cliche.
Yep. Oh my God, I think I might be a beach goth.
I would not be surprised. Seattle as a cliche. I think about that in other forms. I won't touch too deeply into it.
Oh, that could be the subject for a whole nother podcast, man.
Flannels. That's the only thing I'm going to say.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. But what's interesting is that's a lot of the flannel stuff now comes out of California. It's the difference between north and south.
Northern California,
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. I know an LA person may not think of Northern California as California.
Just a quick disclaimer for the audience. Being from LA, I have a lot of thoughts on these things. There is no concrete LA fashion. I would argue this.
Right.
It really depends on neighborhood.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah. Wow, that's a great way to end it, Philip.
Yeah, thanks, Lenan. This was a lot of fun, and we actually I think kind of in our discussions actually kind of helped to recreate some of the joy that you and I have talking about stuff. So I really appreciate it.
Heck yeah, that's what I want to achieve. Do you have any concluding thoughts?
No.
That's fine.